In a quiet town, a seemingly ordinary afternoon turned into a parent's worst nightmare when 4-year-old Emily vanished from her backyard, leaving behind only a scattering of toys and a family consumed by terror. For 10 agonizing years, her unique mark, a tiny triangle of moles on her cheek, became a mother's desperate beacon in a world of searching and fading hope. Just when the possibility of her return felt like a ghost of the past, a phone call changes everything, hinting that the little girl with the unforgettable mark might have been found. But the passage of a decade leaves its own indelible traces, raising questions about who she is now and what secrets the lost years hold. Watch the full story to discover the truth behind Emily's disappearance and whether a family can truly find their way back to each other after a decade lost in the shadows. Don't forget to watch until the end to find out how it all unfolds. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories, and hit the like button if you were moved by Emily's journey. September sunlight slanted through the kitchen window of the Johnson home, painting warm stripes across the worn linoleum floor. The air hummed with the quiet rhythm of a Tuesday afternoon in Willow Creek, a town nestled comfortably in the heart of the Midwest. Life here moved at a gentle pace, marked by Friday night football games, summer parades down Main Street, and the comforting predictability of changing seasons. Sarah Johnson hummed along to the soft radio tune, wiping down the counters while her son, 10-year-old Jake, wrestled with a math worksheet at the kitchen table, his brow furrowed in concentration. The scent of cinnamon from the cookies she'd baked earlier lingered in the air, a sweet domestic perfume. Outside, in the fenced backyard, the centerpiece of their small, ordinary world was in full bloom: 4-year-old Emily. Emily wasn't a whirlwind of chaotic energy. She was a quiet observer, a collector of interesting stones and fallen leaves, a serious conversationalist with the ladybugs that frequented their rose bushes. Today, her bright blonde pigtails bounced as she carefully arranged a collection of pebbles on the patio, creating what she called a fairy city. Her small face, usually alight with a gentle curiosity, was currently a picture of deep concentration. A smear of dirt adorned her left cheek, almost camouflaging the detail that made her instantly recognizable to anyone who knew her. 3 tiny moles, perfectly aligned in the shape of a minuscule triangle just below her cheekbone. It was a sweet, unique mark, a little secret constellation on her skin that her parents and brother often teased her about. "Our little starry girl," Tom, her dad, would call her, pressing a kiss to the spot. Tom Johnson was due home soon from the local construction firm where he worked. Sarah pictured him driving down Elm Street, his favorite classic rock station playing softly, already anticipating the moment he'd pull into the driveway and Emily would rush out all pigtails and pure joy to greet him. This was their life. Simple, safe, deeply loved. The kind of life that felt sturdy, built on a foundation of routine and affection. A life where the biggest worry was whether Jake would finish his homework before dinner, or if the sudden autumn chill meant packing away summer clothes just yet. In the backyard, Emily carefully placed the final shimmering piece of quartz onto her fairy city. She looked up, her blue eyes, the exact shade of a clear September sky, scanning the back door, as if willing her mom or brother to come join her in her quiet, imaginative world. The sun warmed her face, highlighting the faint triangle of moles on her cheek. A tiny, beautiful detail in an otherwise perfectly ordinary afternoon. A moment of peace, held suspended in the golden light before the world tilted on its axis. The house itself became a monument to Emily's absence. The vibrant energy that had once bounced off the walls, the sticky fingerprints on the windows, the tiny shoes by the door, all gone, leaving behind a quiet that was less peaceful and more like a held breath. The kitchen, once the heart of the home, became a place for hushed conversations and meals eaten with an unspoken awareness of the empty chair. The backyard, once a playground, was now just a yard. The swing set stood silent, a lonely sentinel against the changing seasons. "Jake, almost done with that math?" Sarah asked, rinsing a plate. "Almost," he mumbled, chewing on the end of his pencil. The only sounds were the soft radio, the scratching of Jake's pencil, and the distant drone of a lawnmower. A peaceful, ordinary tableau. 5 minutes later, Sarah finished the dishes and walked towards the back door, drying her hands on a towel. "Em, sweetie, time to think about cleaning up." No answer. A little ripple of unease. Emily usually responded right away, her voice a clear, bright bell. "Emily!" Sarah stepped onto the small deck, her eyes scanning the yard. The fairy city was there, abandoned. The swing set stood still, no sign of bouncing pigtails or intense pebble arranging. "Jake!" Sarah's voice was casual, maybe a little too casual. "Did you see Emily come inside?" Jake looked up, startled out of his math trance. "No, wasn't she just outside?" The ripple intensified, becoming a small wave of alarm. "Yeah, she was. Em, come on, honey, no hiding." Sarah walked down the 2 steps into the yard, her eyes sweeping every corner. Behind the shed, under the bushes, near the back fence. "Emily, this isn't funny." Her voice was sharper now. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the back of her neck. Tom's car pulled into the driveway, the familiar rumble of the engine. A sudden, jarring sound in the growing silence. He came around the side of the house, loosening his tie, a smile on his face that vanished the moment he saw Sarah's face. "What's wrong?" "It's Emily. I can't find her. She was just in the yard." Sarah's voice trembled. Tom's eyes immediately went to the empty yard. "Em, where are you, pumpkin?" His voice was loud, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. He joined Sarah, and together they systematically checked every inch of the backyard. Under the deck, inside the shed, behind the rose bushes, nothing. "Maybe she went to the front," Tom suggested, though his eyes held a mirroring panic to Sarah's. They rushed to the front of the house. The street was quiet. No little blonde girl on the sidewalk, no sign of her distinctive pink sandals. "Did she go to Mrs. Gable's?" Sarah asked, already running across the lawn to the neighbor's house. Mrs. Gable hadn't seen her. Neither had the family on the other side. The casual calls of "Emily" escalated into desperate shouts of "Emily! Emily!" Jake stood on the porch, his face pale and scared. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The golden sunlight felt cruel now, mocking their growing dread. They called 911. Reporting a missing child felt surreal, like something that happened in movies, not on their quiet street. "Okay, ma'am, can you describe her?" The dispatcher's voice was calm, too calm. "She's 4 years old," Sarah choked out, tears streaming down her face. "Blonde hair, usually in pigtails. Blue eyes. She's wearing a pink t-shirt and denim shorts. Any distinguishing marks?" Sarah's mind flashed to the little constellation on her daughter's cheek. Yes, she has 3 small moles on her left cheek, right here." She touched her own face, tracing the spot. "In the shape of a tiny triangle. It's very clear." Tom put his arm around her, his own body shaking. The neighborhood, moments ago a picture of afternoon tranquility, was now filled with their frantic calls and the distant wail of approaching sirens. The sun still shone, but for the Johnson family, its light had suddenly, terrifyingly, gone out. The wail of sirens grew louder, a piercing sound that sliced through the once peaceful neighborhood. Red and blue lights flashed, casting an eerie, pulsing glow across the manicured lawns and familiar houses. 2 police cruisers skidded to a halt at the curb in front of the Johnson residence, followed moments later by a 3rd unmarked car. Officers spilled out, their faces grim and professional, a stark contrast to the raw, exposed panic of Sarah and Tom. An officer with kind, weary eyes approached them first, his voice low and steady despite the chaos that was rapidly unfolding. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I'm Officer Miller. We're going to do everything we can. Can you tell us exactly what happened?" Sarah, clutching Tom's arm, recounted the last known moments, her voice trembling, fragmented by sobs. "She was right there, playing in the backyard. Just a few minutes." I looked away. Tom stepped in, his voice a little stronger, trying to provide the facts. She was in the fenced yard. We checked everywhere. She couldn't just vanish. As more officers arrived, a perimeter was set up. Neighbors, drawn by the sirens and flashing lights, gathered on their porches and sidewalks, their faces a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity. Detectives began arriving, their plain clothes marking them as a different kind of authority. One of them, a woman with a sharp, intelligent gaze, introductions herself as Detective Reyes, knelt to speak to Jake, who was still standing silently by the front door, watching with wide, frightened eyes. "We need a description, a detailed one," Officer Miller stressed. "What was she wearing?" "Pink t-shirt, little denim shorts, pink sandals," Sarah answered instantly. The image burned into her mind. "Any distinguishing marks? Anything at all?" "Here." Tom's voice cracked slightly. "Yes. She has 3 small moles on her left cheek. They form a triangle. It's very clear. You can't miss it." He pointed to his own cheek again, demonstrating the location. This detail was immediately relayed to the other officers and detectives. It was a concrete identifier, something unique in a sea of terrifying unknowns. Within the hour, the quiet street was swarming. Uniformed officers conducted door-to-door inquiries, their questions polite but firm. "Did you see anything unusual? Anyone lingering? A strange car?" Neighbors, their initial shock giving way to worry, strained their memories, desperate to provide a helpful detail. The man down the street who was mowing his lawn earlier, the teenager who was walking his dog, the older woman who was watering her petunias. Everyone became a potential witness, their ordinary afternoon now seen through the lens of potential tragedy. Meanwhile, frantic phone calls were being made. The criteria for an Amber Alert were met. A child under 18, believed to be in danger, sufficient descriptive information available. The process was initiated, a digital scream sent out across the airwaves, highway signs and mobile phones, flashing Emily's face and description, including the triangle of moles, to a wider world. Inside the Johnson house, which was now filled with the controlled urgency of law enforcement, the air was thick with despair. Sarah sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, rocking back and forth, whispering Emily's name. Tom paced, running his hands through his hair, answering questions mechanically, his eyes darting to the windows as if expecting to see his daughter reappear in the yard. Jake was taken to a neighbor's house, spared the worst of the immediate chaos, but the fear in his eyes was undeniable. The house, moments ago a sanctuary of family life, now felt invaded, sterile, and cold. Every object, every photograph of Emily, seemed to mock them with the unbearable lightness of her absence. The late afternoon sun outside dipped lower, casting long, ominous shadows that mirrored the terrifying darkness that had suddenly enveloped the Johnson family. The sirens had faded slightly as the search expanded, but the silence they left behind was even more deafening, filled only with the echo of a missing 4-year-old girl and the image of a tiny triangle on her cheek. The first few days blurred into a waking nightmare of flashing lights, urgent questions, and the gnawing, relentless ache of absence. Willow Creek, usually a town that kept to itself, mobilized with startling speed. Neighbors who had been mere acquaintances became allies, organizing search parties that combed the nearby woods, the banks of the creek, the abandoned railway tracks, posters bearing Emily's smiling face, a school photo where her little triangle of moles was clearly visible on her cheek, appeared on every lamppost, in every shop window, at every 4-way stop. Sarah moved through these days in a daze, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate, fragile hope. Every car that slowed on their street, every unfamiliar face, sent a jolt through her. She answered the phone before the first ring, her voice hoarse, always expecting to hear the impossible good news. She joined the search parties herself, her eyes scanning the ground, calling Emily's name until her throat was raw, clinging to the thought that her daughter might be hiding, scared, waiting for her. For Sarah, the triangle of moles on Emily's cheek became an obsession. It was such a small thing, but so uniquely Emily. She would trace the shape on her own cheek repeatedly, a ritual born of grief and longing. In her mind, finding that tiny constellation on her daughter's face was synonymous with finding Emily herself. She provided the detail to every reporter, every volunteer, every sympathetic stranger who offered help. "3 little moles," she'd say, her voice breaking, "like a tiny triangle right here." It was her anchor, her most concrete piece of hope in a world that had dissolved into terrifying uncertainty. Tom, outwardly calmer than Sarah, was a rock of quiet desperation. He handled the logistics, spoke to the police, managed the endless stream of visitors and phone calls. But in the quiet moments, Sarah saw the haunted look in his eyes, the way his jaw would clench, the restless energy that kept him awake at night. He blamed himself, replaying the moments before she disappeared, searching for a sign he had missed. And Jake, poor Jake, the energetic, homework-resistant 10-year-old seemed to shrink before their eyes. He rarely spoke, his usual cheerful chatter replaced by a watchful silence. He avoided the backyard, the sight of the empty swing set and the scattered pebbles of Emily's fairy city too painful to bear. He had lost not just his sister, but the easy, secure world he had always known. The fear that permeated the house settled deep within him, a cold, heavy weight. As the first week bled into the second, the initial surge of energy and hope began to wane, replaced by a grim, weary persistence. The massive search efforts scaled back. Volunteers returned to their own lives, their faces etched with sympathy but their time limited. The flashing lights were gone, leaving behind a different kind of silence. A heavy, expectant silence. The police continued their investigation, following leads that seemed to go nowhere. They reassured the Johnsons, told them they were doing everything they could, but the lack of progress was a constant, dull throb of fear. Doubt began to creep in, cold and insidious. Where could a 4-year-old go? Who would take her? Sarah clung fiercely to hope, but the edges of it were fraying. Every sunrise was a fresh wave of grief that the day before had brought no news. Every sunset a crushing reminder that another day had passed without her daughter. The image of Emily's face on the posters, the tiny triangle of moles a poignant detail, became a constant, agonizing reminder of their lost child. The quiet town held its breath, waiting, watching, as the Johnson family endured the unbearable agony of not knowing. The days and weeks stretching into an endless, terrifying void. 10 years, it wasn't just a block of time, it was an ocean the Johnson family had to navigate, sometimes swimming, sometimes just desperately treading water. The initial, frantic energy of the search eventually subsided, replaced by the dull, persistent ache of a marathon no one wanted to run. The yellowed edges of the posters stapled to telephone poles became brittle, then eventually disappeared, torn down by weather or replaced by event flyers. But in the Johnson home, time became a distorted, cruel measurement, counted not in years but in the number of birthdays missed, holidays celebrated with a gaping hole in the family circle, and the endless succession of Sundays that brought no news. Sarah refused to let Emily become a forgotten statistic. Grief hardened her resolve, sculpting her into a woman defined by her relentless quest. Her active searching never stopped. She joined online forums for missing children, attended conferences, and became a familiar face at local news stations, her voice clear and steady as she spoke about Emily, always mentioning the triangle of moles on her cheek. "It's her mark," she'd explain, holding up a laminated flyer, the image of 4-year-old Emily's face vivid against the stark white paper. "Look for the little triangle. Someone must have seen it." The flyers evolved over the years, including age-progressed images, but that one detail remained constant, a beacon in the fog of time. Sarah saw that tiny triangle everywhere, in patterns on the sidewalk, in the way 3 leaves fell from a tree, in the sprinkle of stars on a clear night. It was a constant, painful reminder, but also a fragile thread of connection to the daughter she refused to give up on. Tom's coping was different. While Sarah channeled her grief into action, Tom retreated inward. The life and laughter seemed to drain out of him slowly, replaced by a quiet, almost crushing weariness. He went to work, paid the bills, kept the house in order, performing the necessary motions of living. But the spark was gone. He rarely spoke about Emily, as if voicing her name out loud was too painful, too final. He couldn't bear to look at the photos that Sarah kept displayed, each one a sharp reminder of what they had lost. His silence was a different kind of scream, a deep internal fracturing that Sarah struggled to reach across. Their marriage, once strong and loving, became a landscape of unspoken grief and diverging paths of coping. They loved each other, yes, but the shared language of their sorrow was lost somewhere in the 10 long years. And Jake? 10 years had transformed him from a scared 10-year-old boy into a quiet, introspective 20-year-old man. He'd navigated adolescence in the shadow of his sister's disappearance, his childhood anxieties magnified by the ever-present threat that had invaded their home. He was protective of his mother, understanding her need to search even when he himself felt a weary resignation setting in. He loved his father, but felt the distance that had grown between them, a shared silence that mirrored the one where Emily used to be. He went to college, got a part-time job, built a life, but it was a life lived with a persistent, low-grade ache, a constant awareness that a fundamental piece of his family was missing. He rarely talked about Emily with friends. It felt too private, too painful, too impossible to explain the unique grief of growing up in a house where a ghost was a permanent resident. Willow Creek remembered, of course. The afternoon sun, so warm and inviting just moments before, seemed to hold its breath. Sarah glanced out the kitchen window again. Emily wasn't immediately visible near the patio. That wasn't unusual. Her fairy city had expanded, incorporating the base of the old oak tree at the back of the yard. Sarah smiled, picturing her daughter's intense focus as she negotiated with imaginary residents among the roots. But the true heart of the absence lay at the end of the hall, in Emily's bedroom. For the first few months, Sarah couldn't bring herself to touch anything. The room remained exactly as Emily had left it on that September afternoon in 2014. A half-finished drawing of a rainbow lay on the small table, crayons scattered beside it. A well-loved teddy bear sat propped against the pillows on the tiny bed, its button eye missing. A pile of picture books was stacked neatly on the nightstand. The closet held a row of small dresses, bright colors that now seemed painfully out of place. It was a time capsule of a life abruptly paused. Stepping into the room felt like stepping into a sacred, sorrowful space. The air was still, silent, filled with the ghost of laughter and the scent of childhood. Sarah would stand in the doorway sometimes for long minutes just looking, trying to imprint every detail onto her memory, terrified that if she forgot anything, she might lose another piece of Emily. Over the years, the room changed, but slowly, reluctantly. Sarah couldn't bear to pack everything away, to erase the physical evidence of her daughter. She eventually boxed up the clothes Emily had outgrown, folding them carefully, pressing them to her face before placing them in storage bins labeled with shaky handwriting. The half-finished drawing remained, faded slightly by time. The teddy bear stayed on the bed. The room became a sanctuary for Sarah and a place of quiet grief for Tom. He would sometimes stand in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slumped, the silence in the room amplifying the silence within him. Jake, after a certain age, rarely went in there. It was too much of a reminder, a tangible representation of the loss that had shaped his own young life. The empty room became a physical manifestation of their loss, a constant visual ache. It was a space filled with memories, with what-ifs, with the echo of a 4-year-old's voice. It symbolized the life Emily didn't get to live, the milestones they didn't get to witness. The small bed, never slept in for 10 years, the toys gathering a fine layer of dust, the walls that had never seen posters of teenage idols, it was all a silent testament to the decade of Sundays that had passed without her. It was a room that was both a museum of a happy past and a stark, painful reminder of an empty present, a space that held their enduring love and their agonizing, unending grief. 10 years and 11 months. That was the count on the small embroidered calendar Sarah kept by the phone in the kitchen. Not that she needed a calendar to know. Every day was a tally mark against the hope she desperately clung to. The phone, once a source of constant, hopeful ringing in the days and weeks after Emily disappeared, had settled into a mournful silence over the years, punctuated only by calls from family, friends, or the occasional cold call from a telemarketer. It rarely rang with news. So when it did ring on a humid August afternoon in 2024, a decade after the sun had set on their lives, Sarah's hand froze as she reached for it. It wasn't the usual cheerful chime of a family member calling. This was a police number displayed starkly on the caller ID. Her heart, long accustomed to a dull, constant ache, suddenly hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Tom, reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, looked up, his eyes meeting Sarah's. The ordinary quiet of the afternoon shattered. Sarah answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello? Mrs. Sarah Johnson?" The voice on the other end was formal, calm, but with an underlying note of careful significance that immediately put Sarah on high alert. "This is Detective Ramirez, calling from the Davenport Police Department in Iowa, a different state. Miles and years away from Willow Creek." Sarah's mind raced. Davenport? Why would police from Iowa be calling them? "Yes," Sarah managed, her hand trembling. "This is Sarah Johnson." "Mrs. Johnson," the detective continued, "we believe we may have located a young woman who matches the description of your daughter, Emily." The words hung in the air, heavy, impossible, a sound that Sarah had dreamed of, yearned for, and simultaneously dreaded for 10 long years. It felt unreal, a cruel trick of her mind, a phantom limb of hope manifesting in a phone call. "Emily," Sarah repeated, the name catching in her throat. My Emily?" Tom was on his feet now, his face ashen, his eyes fixed on Sarah, silently begging for information. "Yes, ma'am. The timeline and some physical characteristics are consistent," Detective Ramirez said. "We have a young woman here, approximately 14 years old. She was found in a situation that led to police involvement. When questioned, some details she provided, combined with her appearance, made us cross-reference with missing persons databases. 14. Emily would be 14 now." The age-progressed images Sarah had carefully distributed over the years flashed in her mind. "Physical characteristics?" Tom interjected, his voice rough with emotion, moving closer to the phone. "Yes, sir," the detective replied. "She has a distinctive marking on her left cheek. 3 small moles, forming a triangle." Sarah gasped, a sharp, broken sound. The world tilted, the kitchen, the sunlight, the dusty photographs on the counter, all of it swam before her eyes. The triangle. The little constellation she had thought about, prayed over, searched for every single day for a decade. It couldn't be. Could it? A whirlwind of emotions tore through her. Disbelief so profound it felt like a physical blow, terror at what this girl might have endured, and a tiny, fragile, almost unbearable flicker of hope. Was this real? After all this time? Tom took the phone from Sarah's shaking hand. His voice was tight with suppressed emotion. "Detective, this is Tom Johnson, Emily's father. What happens now? Is it definitely her?" "We'll need to confirm identity, Mr. Johnson. Through DNA and ideally an in-person verification," Detective Ramirez explained, his tone compassionate but professional. "We understand this is a tremendous shock. We're handling this with the utmost care. We can arrange for you to come to Davenport as soon as possible." As Tom spoke to the detective, arranging the details, Sarah stood rooted to the spot, her hand still outstretched where she had held the phone. Her mind was a jumble of images. 4-year-old Emily in her pink sandals, the empty room upstairs, the faded flyers with the little triangle, and now, the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of a 14-year-old girl in Iowa with their daughter's unique mark. 10 years of waiting, of grief, of relentless searching. It had all led to this one. Impossible phone call. Hope, A stranger for so long had just knocked on their door, terrifying in its suddenness. The drive to Davenport felt endless, a blur of highway miles and choked-back sobs. Sarah and Tom barely spoke, each lost in their own whirlwind of fragile hope and deep-seated dread. What if it wasn't her? What if it was? But she wasn't the Emily they remembered. 10 years was a lifetime in childhood. They were met at the police station by Detective Ramirez, whose quiet, serious demeanor did little to calm their racing hearts. He led them to a small neutral room. "We've taken a DNA sample," he explained gently. "Results should be back within the next 24 to 48 hours. But we thought you might want to see her now. She knows you're here. See her now." The words echoed in Sarah's mind. See the girl who might be her daughter. Fear warred with an overwhelming surge of maternal instinct. "How is she?" Tom asked, his voice raspy. "She's quiet," Detective Ramirez said, choosing his words carefully. "Understandably overwhelmed. She's been through a lot. We have a child psychologist with her. We're taking it very slowly." He opened the door, stepping aside to let them enter. The room was sparse. A plain table, a few chairs. Sitting on one of the chairs was a girl. She looked up as they entered, her eyes wide and apprehensive. She was thin, her clothes ill-fitting. Her hair was a dull brown, a stark contrast to the bright blonde of Emily's childhood. Her face was guarded, her expression unreadable. Sarah's breath hitched. This girl, she didn't immediately look like the 4-year-old face etched in her memory. The roundness of childhood was gone, replaced by sharper angles. The vibrant spark Sarah remembered was dimmed, hidden behind a veil of caution. Disappointment, sharp and sudden, threatened to overwhelm her. Was this a mistake? Then the girl shifted slightly, turning her head. And Sarah saw it. On her left cheek, just below the cheekbone, were 3 tiny moles, perfectly placed, forming an unmistakable triangle. It was the same little constellation she had traced 1,000,000 times on flyers, in her mind, on her own skin. Time had changed the face, altered the hair, perhaps even reshaped the soul, but it had not touched that small, unique mark. "Emily," Sarah whispered, the name a fragile thread across the 10-year chasm. The girl's eyes, the same shade of sky blue Sarah remembered, widened almost imperceptibly. She didn't speak, didn't rush into their arms. She just looked, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. Recognition, fear, confusion. Tom's reaction was instantaneous and visceral. He let out a choked sob and rushed forward, kneeling clumsily beside the girl's chair. "Emily! Oh, God! Emily, it's us! It's Daddy!" He reached out, his hand hovering, unsure if he should touch her. Sarah followed, moving more slowly, tears streaming down her face. The girl looked so different, so much older, her body language wary and closed off. This wasn't the little girl who would launch herself into their arms. This was a stranger, a teenager bearing the physical mark of their lost child. The shock of her changed appearance was profound, a jolt that momentarily overshadowed the relief of finding her. But the triangle of moles, it was undeniable. It was Emily's mark. "The moles," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion, pointing to her cheek. "It's her, Tom. It's our Emily." The girl's eyes followed Sarah's finger, then flickered down to the moles on her own cheek, a faint, almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. It was not a joyous reunion filled with happy tears and immediate embraces. It was tentative, heartbreakingly cautious. Later, the DNA results would come back, the scientific confirmation a formality after the undeniable visual proof. But in that moment, in that sparse room in Davenport, standing before a changed girl with an unchanging mark, Sarah and Tom knew. This quiet, wary teenager, bearing the tiny triangle on her cheek, was their daughter. She was found. But the journey of bringing her home and discovering who she had become had only just begun. The drive back from Davenport was different, quieter, heavier. Emily sat in the back seat, a silent presence, watching the unfamiliar landscape roll by with an expressionless gaze. The relief and shock of the initial identification had given way to a profound awkwardness. Sarah and Tom kept glancing back at her, a yearning in their eyes that Emily didn't seem to know how to meet. They tried small talk, gentle questions about the drive, the weather, anything to bridge the 10-year gap, but her responses were minimal, polite but distant. Pulling back into Willow Creek felt surreal. The familiar streets, the houses they knew, the old oak tree on the corner, they were all exactly the same, yet fundamentally altered by the decade of grief and searching that had passed within them. As they turned onto Elm Street, the houses came into view, each one triggering a wave of memories for Sarah and Tom, but for Emily, they were just houses. Their own home stood waiting at the end of the street. It looked welcoming, lived in, the porch light on as if expecting guests. To Sarah and Tom, it was the sanctuary they had longed to bring Emily back to. To Emily, it was a stranger's house. They pulled into the driveway, the crunch of tires on gravel a loud sound in the evening stillness. Neighbors emerged from their homes, standing on their porches, offering tentative waves and tearful smiles. They knew. Everyone in Willow Creek knew. The news had spread like wildfire. The story of the missing Johnson girl with the triangle moles, found after 10 years. Their faces held a mixture of profound relief and raw curiosity, their eyes fixed on the girl emerging from the car. Emily, sensing their gaze, ducked her head, pulling the collar of her borrowed jacket higher. Walking up the familiar path to the front door felt like a journey across time. Tom fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking slightly. The door swung open, revealing the entryway, the worn rug, the family photos on the wall. Sarah watched Emily's face for any flicker of recognition, any sign of memory stirring. There was none. Her eyes scanned the space blankly as if entering a place she had never seen before. This is our home, Emily," Sarah said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Your home." Emily just nodded, her gaze drifting past the photos of a family she didn't remember, past the happy, smiling face of a 4-year-old girl with bright blonde pigtails and a prominent triangle of moles. That girl felt like a distant relative, a character in a story she had only just heard. The house was filled with echoes for Sarah and Tom, echoes of laughter, of footsteps on the stairs, of a little girl's voice singing off-key. For Emily, it was just quiet. Too quiet. The air felt heavy with unspoken history, with emotions she couldn't decipher. Adapting to this new old life was a constant, silent struggle. The bed in her room, untouched for a decade, felt strange and unfamiliar. The toys, frozen in time, were remnants of a childhood she couldn't access. Sarah tried to reintroduce her to her old life, showing her photo albums, telling her stories, pointing out the marks on her cheek. "See? Your special triangle." Emily would look, a flicker of something in her eyes, but no outward sign of connection. The kindness of the townspeople was overwhelming, and often overwhelming. People meant well, but their hushed tones, their sympathetic glances, their comments about how much she had grown or how they remembered her tiny moles, it all felt like a spotlight on a past she didn't own. She was a celebrity she didn't know how to be, recognized for a tragedy she only partially understood. The house was a place of ghosts, of memories that belonged to others. The family who lived here, these people who claimed to be her parents and brother, were strangers yearning for a child who no longer existed. Emily was here, a girl with their daughter's eyes and their daughter's unique mark, but she was navigating an unfamiliar world, burdened by a history she couldn't recall and trying to find a place for herself in a life that felt both like a miracle and a foreign country. The quiet town watched, hopeful but uncertain, as the lost daughter tried to find her way home within the walls of an unfamiliar house. Life in the Johnson house settled into a fragile, uncomfortable rhythm. The initial excitement and overwhelming emotion of Emily's return gave way to the complex, painstaking reality of building a relationship with a stranger who carried the indelible marks of their child. The silence that had always been in the house felt different now. Less an absence, more a watchful quiet, filled with unspoken questions and the weight of a decade lived apart. The biggest hurdle was memory, or rather, the lack thereof. Emily's recollections of her life before September 2014 were frustratingly vague, like trying to grasp smoke. She had fleeting images: a swing set, a dog, though she couldn't remember its name or color, the taste of a specific cookie. Sarah would show her photographs, point out familiar landmarks in town, tell stories of family vacations or funny things she used to say. Emily would look at the photos, her brow furrowed, sometimes offering a small, "Maybe?" or "I think so?" but mostly just shrugging, a silent acknowledgement that these vibrant snapshots of a happy past felt foreign to her. The little girl in the pictures, the one with the bright eyes and the noticeable triangle of moles, felt like a character in a book she had read a long time ago. Her memories of the 10 years in between were even more elusive, a jumble of disjointed images and feelings she couldn't piece together. When gently questioned by a child psychologist or by Sarah and Tom trying to understand what she had endured, she would become withdrawn, her eyes distant. She could describe places she had been, maybe a routine she had followed, but the emotional context, the faces of the people she had been with, the specifics of her daily life, it was all frustratingly, perhaps protectively, locked away. The trauma had built walls, formidable barriers around the most painful parts of her past. The triangle of moles on her cheek, the very mark that had led them back to her, sometimes seemed to trigger a reaction. When Sarah would gently touch it, her eyes filled with love and sorrow, Emily would sometimes flinch almost imperceptibly or turn her head away. It wasn't a conscious rejection, but a subtle physical response, as if the touch or the reminder of the mark stirred something unsettling beneath the surface. Conversations about it, about how they had searched for the girl with the triangle moles, seemed to make her uncomfortable, drawing her further into herself. It was her mark, yes, but perhaps it was also a symbol of the discontinuity of her life, a reminder of the break between the little girl who had it and the teenager she had become. The psychological toll of her experience was evident in her wariness, her difficulty trusting, her quiet solitude. She was polite, she followed rules, but she rarely offered unsolicited thoughts or showed strong emotions. She existed in the house like a guest, a precious, long-lost guest they desperately wanted to stay, but who seemed unsure if she belonged. Sarah and Tom tried to be patient, to give her space, to not push too hard. But the ache of wanting to connect, to bridge the 10-year gap, was a constant, living thing. They looked at her, saw glimmers of the little girl they lost, in the curve of her smile, the color of her eyes, the undeniable triangle on her cheek. But they were meeting a stranger, a survivor with a past she couldn't or wouldn't share. The house remained quiet, filled with the silent tension of a family trying to remember how to be a family, their efforts complicated by the vast, empty spaces in their daughter's memory. The truth of what happened to Emily in those 10 years remained hidden, locked behind the doors of her fragmented past. Emily's return ignited a dormant fire in the Willow Creek Police Department. The dusty case file, labeled Emily Johnson, Missing Person, September 2014, was pulled from storage, its contents a painful reminder of a decade of dead ends. Detective Miller, now older but still with the same kind eyes, was one of the original officers on the scene. Detective Reyes, who had spoken to young Jake that terrifying afternoon, was now the lead investigator. For them, and for the entire department, this was a chance to finally close a case that had haunted their town. The immediate focus was Emily, but her fragmented memories, as explored in the previous chapter, made progress agonizingly slow. Sitting with Detective Reyes, sometimes with the child psychologist present, Emily was gently prompted to recall anything she could about the day she disappeared and the years that followed. Her recollections of the abduction itself were like damaged film strips, flashes of images and sensations, but no clear narrative. A hand, a car door, a feeling of being lifted. The face of the person who took her remained frustratingly blank, a shadowed figure in her mind. This lack of a clear memory about the crucial moment was a significant hurdle, a void at the heart of the investigation. Her memories of the 10 years in captivity were equally piecemeal. She could describe places she had lived, not by name, but by details. A house with a big tree, a place with lots of dogs, a room with a window that looked out at a brick wall. She remembered routines, waking up, eating certain foods, doing chores, sometimes being taught things, sometimes being left alone for long periods. She remembered feelings, fear, loneliness, boredom, sometimes a strange kind of routine safety that was perhaps more disturbing than outright cruelty. When asked about the people she was with, she was vague. A woman, she might say, sometimes a man. She couldn't provide names, detailed descriptions, or even a clear sense of how many different people had been in her life over the decade. Their faces, too, were often just shadows in her memory. The child psychologist explained this was common in long-term trauma cases. The mind often suppressed the most painful details as a survival mechanism. The triangle of moles on her cheek, while crucial for identification, didn't seem to unlock specific memories of her captivity, though sometimes when a detective would point to it while asking a question, a flicker of discomfort would cross her face, a subtle physical trigger that hinted at unpleasant associations tied to her unique mark in her life away from home. Despite the challenges, the police worked tirelessly, following every crumb of information Emily could provide. They cross-referenced her vague descriptions of places with databases of properties linked to other crimes, missing persons cases, or individuals with suspicious histories. They brought in specialists, forensic linguists, to analyze her speech patterns for clues about where she might have lived, and geographers to map potential locations based on her descriptions of landscapes or travel. New evidence was scarce. The abduction had happened a decade ago, and whatever immediate clues might have existed were long gone. The focus was almost entirely on Emily's testimony, frustratingly incomplete as it was, and the circumstances surrounding her discovery in Davenport. The police in Davenport were collaborating, providing details about the situation where she was found, the people who were present, and the location itself. The search for the abductor, or abductors, was a painstaking process of trying to build a picture from scattered pieces. Was it a single person? A couple? Was it someone who knew the Johnsons or a complete stranger? The lack of a clear motive, no ransom demands were ever made, added another layer of complexity. Was it a random act, or was there a disturbing hidden reason behind Emily's disappearance? The investigation was a constant reminder of the 10 years lost, of the life that had been stolen. Every unanswered question, every blank space in Emily's memory was a testament to the perpetrator's success in erasing her past. The police were determined to bring justice, but they were working against time, against faded memories, and against the deliberate actions of someone who had successfully hidden a child for a decade. The search continued, a grim pursuit through the shadows of Emily's forgotten years, hoping to uncover the truth that lay buried beneath the layers of trauma and time. The initial wave of relief and public attention subsided, leaving the Johnson family to navigate the quiet, complex reality of their new life. The house, once filled with the hopeful energy of the search, was now thick with a different kind of tension, the strain of 3 people trying desperately to connect across a chasm of 10 lost years. Sarah and Tom, whose marriage had weathered the storm of loss but was brittle with years of unspoken grief, found themselves facing new, unexpected challenges. They had idealized Emily in her absence, holding on to the image of the 4-year-old they remembered. The 14-year-old girl who sat across from them at the dinner table, quiet and withdrawn, was both a miracle and a stranger. They longed to comfort her, to ask about her years away, to shower her with the love they had held captive for a decade. But every attempt to get close seemed to meet an invisible wall. Emily was not defiant or rebellious, she was simply distant. She participated in family activities when asked, did her chores without complaint, and was unfailingly polite. But her eyes often seemed far away, her thoughts locked in a private world they couldn't access. Sarah would try to initiate conversations. "How was your day, sweetie?" Or, "Do you remember that time we went to the beach?" Emily would offer a one-word answer or non-committal shrug. The easy flow of parent-child communication was absent, replaced by stilted exchanges and uncomfortable silences. For Sarah, this emotional distance was a fresh wound. She had fought so hard to find Emily, only to feel now that a crucial part of her was still missing, hidden behind a veil of trauma and lost time. She blamed herself, wondering if she was pushing too hard, saying the wrong things, if her own desperate need for connection was overwhelming her daughter. Tom, equally heartbroken by the lack of connection, retreated further into himself, his quiet nature making it even harder for him to bridge the gap. He watched Sarah's pained attempts, feeling helpless, the silence in the house amplifying his own sense of failure. And then there was Jake, the 20-year-old brother who had only vague, flickering memories of his 4-year-old sister. He had grieved her absence, grown up with her as a ghost, a tragic figure in his family's story. Now she was here, a living, breathing person, but she wasn't the sister of his childhood memories. She was a teenager he didn't know, with experiences he couldn't fathom. He felt a responsibility to be a good older brother, but he didn't know how. Their interactions were awkward, marked by a polite unfamiliarity. He saw the little triangle of moles on her cheek, the same mark from the faded photos, and it was a jarring reminder of the little girl she once was, a girl he felt no real connection to. The tension in the house was palpable, a silent hum of unmet expectations and unspoken pain. They were a family reunited, but they didn't feel like a family. They were 3 individuals living under the same roof, bound by biology and shared trauma, but separated by a decade of vastly different experiences. The empty chair at the table was filled, but the emotional space it represented remained a vast, empty void that everyone was struggling and often failing to bridge. The journey of bringing Emily home was far from over. It was a slow, arduous climb, and the summit of true family connection felt impossibly far away. The walls around Emily's memories didn't crumble overnight. They began to show cracks, hairline fractures appearing unexpectedly, letting slivers of the past bleed into her present. It often happened when she was least expecting it, triggered by something seemingly innocuous, a scent, a sound, a fleeting image. One afternoon, while watching a documentary about animals, a scene with a specific breed of dog made her pause. A flash of a yard, a chain-link fence, and the barking of a similar dog. She didn't remember the name of the place or the people, but the feeling of watching that dog day after day was suddenly vivid. It was a small memory, but it was hers, not a story told by her parents. Another time, Sarah was gently brushing Emily's hair, a simple, motherly act. As she tucked a strand behind Emily's left ear, her fingers brushed against the familiar landscape of the 3 moles on her cheek. Emily stiffened. A sharp, unwelcome image flashed behind her eyes. A woman's face, close up, inspecting her cheek with a critical gaze. A voice, sharp and cold, saying something about the mark. The memory was fleeting, fragmented, but the unpleasant emotion, a mixture of fear and shame, lingered. She pulled away from Sarah, not roughly, but with a sudden, non-negotiable movement that left Sarah's hand suspended in the air. "Emily, are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with concern. Emily hugged herself, shaking her head slightly. She couldn't explain it, couldn't articulate the sudden chill that had just swept over her. The moles, her unique identifier, which her parents looked at with love, seemed to hold a different, darker meaning in the buried corners of her mind. These small, involuntary recollections were like pebbles dropped into a still pond, sending ripples across the surface of her carefully constructed ping-jing, calm, peaceful facade. They were disorienting, sometimes frightening, but they were also pieces of the puzzle, fragments of the truth. Detective Reyes and the child psychologist worked patiently with Emily, creating a safe space for these memories to emerge. They didn't push, but they were attentive, ready to listen and document any detail, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. They learned to recognize the subtle signs that a memory was surfacing. A faraway look in her eyes, a sudden stillness the way she would sometimes trace the triangle on her own cheek, a gesture that had taken on a new, complex meaning. Emily's fragmented recollections, combined with the ongoing police investigation in Davenport, began to yield tentative connections. The description of the house with the big tree, when cross-referenced with property records and witness statements from the Davenport area, led police to a specific neighborhood. The mention of lots of dogs might link to potential animal hoarding situations or rural properties. The memory triggered by the mole, though vague, suggested that her unique mark had been noticed, perhaps even commented on or concealed by her captor. This detail, combined with other small clues, a regional accent she sometimes unconsciously adopted, a specific brand of cereal she seemed familiar with, a phrase she used that wasn't common in Willow Creek, helped the investigators narrow down the potential geographical area where she had been held. The past was no longer just a series of blank pages. It was a damaged photograph, slowly developing, revealing glimpses of the shadows that had held her captive. Emily was still largely a mystery to her family and even to herself, but the cracks in the wall of her memory were letting in just enough light to guide the investigation forward, step by painstaking step, towards the truth of where she had been and who had taken her there. The fragments of memory, the vague descriptions, the subtle linguistic clues. They weren't a complete map, but they were enough for Detective Reyes and her team to narrow the focus of their investigation considerably. The collaborative work with the Davenport police, combined with old missing persons reports and databases of individuals with a history of similar non-violent offenses or psychological issues, began to paint a possible picture. The breakthrough came not from a dramatic chase, but from a quiet stakeout. Based on Emily's description of a house near a park with a specific type of fence, and cross-referenced with the partial license plate number recalled by a witness in Davenport from the situation where Emily was found, police identified a property on the outskirts of a small town 20 miles from Davenport. The homeowner, a single woman in her late 50s named Susan Miller, no relations to the Willow Creek officer, had a history of minor fraud and a psychological profile that suggested severe loneliness and a tendency towards delusion. Police watched the house for 2 days. There was no sign of anything overtly criminal, no bars on the windows, no obvious signs of confinement. It looked like a perfectly ordinary, slightly neglected suburban home. The tension built with every passing hour. Then, early on the third morning, as Susan Miller left for work, police moved in. The house, inside, was clean but cluttered, filled with craft supplies, collections of dolls, and an unnerving number of photographs, mostly landscapes and animals, but some of children, cut from magazines. And in a box in the back of a closet, they found it. Not chains or weapons, but photo albums. Albums filled with pictures of Emily. Not the Emily of Willow Creek, but an Emily who was growing up. Pictures of her playing in the yard, helping in a small garden, sitting at a kitchen table doing schoolwork. Mundane, everyday moments, documented with chilling meticulousness. Susan Miller's camera had been a constant, silent observer of Emily's stolen childhood. When confronted, Susan didn't resist. She seemed more confused than defiant. Her motive, pieced together from her rambling statements and psychological evaluations, was tragically mundane and deeply disturbing. She had lost her own daughter years ago, and, in her grief and isolation, had developed a delusion that Emily was a lost child who needed a home, a child she was rescuing and raising as her own. She genuinely seemed to believe she had been providing Emily with a better life, shielding her from perceived dangers in the outside world. There was no evidence of physical abuse or overt cruelty, but the psychological manipulation, the isolation, the theft of a life, the damage was immense. When questioned about the moles, Susan frowned slightly. "Oh, her little marks," she said, a flicker of something possessive in her eyes. "Yes, I noticed those right away, so unique. I thought about covering them sometimes so no one would, well, you know." but they were a part of her. My Emily. The casualness with which she discussed altering a child's appearance sent a chill down the spines of the hardened detectives. Facing Susan Miller, seeing the ordinariness of the woman who had stolen a decade of their daughter's life, was a different kind of trauma for Sarah and Tom. She wasn't a monster in the traditional sense, but the ordinariness of her delusion, the twisted logic of her actions, was terrifying in its own way. There was no clear motive of malice, but a horrifying blindness born of grief and mental illness. Emily's reaction was even more complex. Seeing the woman didn't unlock a flood of clear memories, but it solidified some of the fragmented images. The face from the mole memory, the voice that commented on her mark. It was Susan Miller. There was no dramatic confrontation, no outpouring of rage or tears in that moment. Just a quiet, detached observation, a confirmation of a shadowy figure from her past. The woman who had been her captor for 10 years was just a woman. The finding of the abductor brought a sense of closure to the investigation, but for the Johnson family it opened up a new, difficult chapter. The why was explained in a clinical, tragic sense, but it didn't erase the what happened or heal the deep wounds left by the stolen years. The past had finally caught up, its face not one of pure evil, but of a brokenness that had devastatingly intersected with their lives. The truth was out, but its implications would ripple through their family long after the courtroom doors closed. The courtroom verdict, the media frenzy, the hushed whispers of the town, it all faded eventually, like the last echoes of a storm. Susan Miller was where she needed to be, her actions attributed to a tangled web of grief and mental illness. But her confinement offered little immediate solace to the Johnson family. Finding Emily, finding the truth, wasn't an ending. It was a new, daunting beginning. The path to healing was not a straight line. It was a winding, uphill road, often shrouded in fog. Therapy became a regular part of their lives, a space for Emily to slowly, painstakingly process the trauma of her lost years, and for Sarah, Tom, and Jake to navigate their complex grief and learn how to connect with the young woman Emily had become. Emily remained quiet, the emotional walls built during her captivity still firmly in place. But with time, and with the patient, unwavering presence of her family and the guidance of her therapist, small changes began to emerge. She started spending more time in the common areas of the house, no longer retreating to her room as soon as dinner was over. She began to participate in family conversations, offering opinions, sometimes even a quiet joke. The strained politeness slowly began to soften, replaced by tentative, genuine interactions. Sarah and Tom learned to temper their desperate need for the past with an acceptance of the present. They stopped trying to force memories or recreate the childhood Emily had lost. Instead, they focused on creating new ones. Simple things: movie nights on the couch, walks in the park, teaching her to drive, celebrating her 15th birthday not with elaborate parties, but with quiet family dinners. They learned to read her subtle cues, to understand when she needed space and when she might be open to a moment of connection. Their marriage, tested and strained by years of separate grief, slowly began to mend, finding common ground in their shared love for the daughter they were getting to know again. Jake, too, found a way to connect. He didn't try to be the big brother of her lost childhood, but an older brother in the present. He shared his music with her, talked about college, treated her not as a fragile relic of the past, but as a sometimes awkward, sometimes funny, always watching younger sister. He learned to accept that their bond would be different, built on shared experiences of the present rather than shared memories of the past. Emily's memories of her time away remained fragmented, perhaps always would. But the fragments no longer held the same terrifying power. They were pieces of her history, difficult pieces, but they were not the entirety of who she was. She was a survivor, she was a Johnson, she was Emily, and the triangle of moles on her cheek? It was still there, a permanent part of her. It no longer felt solely like a symbol of a lost child or a trigger for traumatic memories. It was simply her, a unique mark on the face of a young woman who had endured unimaginable hardship and had, against all odds, found her way back. It was a reminder of where she came from, yes, but also a testament to her resilience, a quiet assertion of her enduring identity. There was no magical return to normal. The scars, visible and invisible, remained. There would always be moments of sadness, of frustration, of grappling with the profound injustice of what had happened. The empty room at the end of the hall was no longer a frozen shrine, but a bedroom lived in by a teenager, albeit one with a past unlike any other. The Johnson family was forever changed, their lives irrevocably marked by the 10 years Emily was gone. But as they sat together on the porch on a warm summer evening, the silence between them no longer heavy with unspoken grief, but comfortable, companionable, they knew they were building something new. A different kind of family, perhaps, shaped by loss and resilience, by the painful past and the uncertain, but hopeful, future. The road to healing was long, but they were walking it together, step by painstaking step, a family found, finding their way home in each other's presence. The light, which had seemed to go out on that long-ago September day, was slowly, tentatively beginning to return, not as a sudden flood, but as a gentle, persistent dawn.